Welcome everybody to the mini proposal workshop. And today we have joined again to continue with the discussions about decentralized tools for decentralized groups. This time the problem statement we picked is disseminating and documenting meetings are time-consuming activities. And today we are going to the second chapter, solution ideation, to find minimum viable solutions to this problem statement, and then also to perhaps a collective voting if needed on the feature set we are going to continue forward and present it in the next session. So what solutions do we need to solve the problem? Disseminating and documenting meetings are time-consuming activities. How do we address them?
So by capturing, all of the notes and the insights that they're supposed to be capturing manually, we would be doing, through the tool, and then extracting classifications. So there's a number of ways we would extract the value from a meeting that removes the need for a secretary-like person to take the meeting notes. So we plan to use things like text classification, text extraction, and automation triggers as well.
In any of that, is there any kind of like operational service included? For example, that somebody has to be on the spot to kind of configure the tool, or it's just magically happens?
A lot of that is predefined by the user themselves. So, you have to tell the bot what you want to join. What meetings would you like to join? So you can integrate your calendar. Once your calendar is integrated, you have options of, do I want it to join every meeting? You can select specifically a calendar group. So you can create a calendar group and then add specific meetings to that particular group. Then it will only join those meetings. You can say, I want it to manually join the meetings, and then it doesn't automatically join any of your meetings, and you have to log in when you have your meeting joined and then click on it and tell it to join the meeting. So it kind of gives the admin or the account holder the permission to select when they want that bot to actually join. But that's configurable. So if they defined it as I wanted to join every meeting, then it will automatically. Then there's the second layer of what templates do you want it to produce, like what type of reports. They can configure their own with like a plug and play module set. And then it will automatically produce that particular template, or they can always create one after the fact as well. I see Nin's hands up.
Hey, Curtis. Hey, Chivo. Hey, everybody. Saw your message on Slack too.
Yeah.
The more I listen to you describe this solution, the more I'm thinking of like Otter.ai and similar.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is that what you're thinking, or is it different?
No. So when we first started, Otter wasn't really providing a lot of the features that we had thought about. Now Otter is starting to. I think it's called Otter Pilot, and that's a brand new feature. They're beta testing it right now. It is somewhat of the features that we're talking about, but there's three primary features that we want to focus on with our tool that differs from Otter. Otter is definitely oriented around the meeting and summarizing the meeting. We're trying to build more like a KMS, where all of those meetings and the insights from them sort of combine, and then you use things like ChatGPT or AI to derive the value out of it and extract that value. Instead of individual independent meetings, I can ask, What is the most controversial topic? What is some of the questions that just keep coming up over and over again in these meetings? Who has the most participation or contribution in these meetings? And because those metrics are sort of captured over time and built up over time, it creates a different perspective, I feel like. We do have, I discovered a tool that is in direct competition to us about 3 days ago. I found it, and it lays it out exactly how we explained it. And so now I'm changing a little bit of my tune because it's almost exactly what we planned to build. So now that's the first pillar, is the knowledge management system and integrating into that. Then the secondary one is building around communities. Most of these tools are, you're the account holder, you get access to your information, but it's very difficult for your community or your people to get access to it unless you're sending reports to them via email or exporting it to PDF and sharing it somewhere. It's not, to me, a collaborative environment. So we want to build communities in our tool where the members can collaborate on that knowledge management system. They can make their own prompts. Maybe those prompts show some very, very valuable information. They can then share that with the rest of the community as well. So somewhere to have conversations, discussions around these particular topics. Maybe it's a governance topic and they want to have a conversation surrounding it. But, as we know, Discord and Slack and all these other communication tools that we use tend to just grow, for forever and go on, and things get buried. So we want to have it more like, this is a topic and this is a conversation. It's meant to either be short-lived or long-running, but it's purpose-built conversation, not just random chat. And then that is integrated into the insight that's captured during the meetings. Maybe produce forms, produce survey results, metrics, all those kinds of things can go into your KMS. Sorry, I know that was a long-winded answer.
Cool, thanks. So kind of like, if you could integrate Otter with ChatGPT and maybe Notions, maybe some project management suite.
Yeah, that's more or less, yeah. And plus a conversation, governance consensus mechanism as well, yeah. So the meeting notes frequently serve the need of organizing the discussion, compressing outputs, and revisiting the content. Yes, so one of our focuses is the retrieval of this data. How do people want to retrieve it? And that is one of the differences that we want to do from Otter. When you retrieve this data from Otter, it's by date. It's chronological, right? You have your meeting that occurred at this time and another meeting that occurred at this time. So the act of retrieving your information is chronological. When I don't feel that's natural to people, it's this massive pool of information and knowledge, and you have a specific target or a specific type of information that you're after. What is going to be the process of retrieving that? And really think kind of that integration of ChatGPT is how you can do that. You can ask it, anything. Who has attended the most amount of meetings, or how many hours has Joe Smith attended meetings, and it can kind of capture some of those insights.
So how do you plan to integrate ChatGPT? Because nowadays ChatGPT is used by training on the whole body of data sets, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here, to get an answer from this particular part, you would need to retrain it, or do you have a better way technically?
So there is two methods that I'm kind of debating over right now. There is the retraining option, which would give us a bit more accurate results because the training data sets that we're feeding it are more like the content that it would be analyzing for the customer. So retraining it will just sort of give it more of the touch and feel of how it will get used with our customers. The other option, which is where we're heading, at least at first for now, is fine tuning the tool. So it's already been trained, it's pre-trained. We take the pre-trained model and then we fine tune it with our data sets. And then narrow its scope of what it has access to, it being their KMS. So this ChatGPT model will have full access to their knowledge base. And when you query it, it's going to query your knowledge base, but it's been pre-trained to have all the intelligence essentially, and classification and all of the transformer abilities already built in. So there is pros and cons to both, right? You know, if you just retrain it, then you're going to have higher level of accuracy, but the ML ops is fairly expensive. Then there's just the fine tuning, which is really giving it access to your database and saying, use this as referential information to respond to the person. We see, what I'd like is we have a dashboard and, you know, you have your meeting section. There's a few different sections with specific result types or information types. You can look at something chronological. You can look at the attendees. You can look at all the summaries. But then there's just the general information that contains everything. Each one of those sections would have a ChatGPT-like bot. I'm actually leaning towards Bard, but it would have that bot that is scoped specifically to that material. So you can ask it those specific questions and it would give you more accurate results because the data set that it has access to is narrowed. So it's going to give you a bit more accuracy that way. But then, of course, your general ChatGPT that can query the entire data set is probably going to be less accurate, but give you more potential insight. And so that's how we kind of see where you're interacting with the ChatGPT. So there's going to be a little text box kind of all over this dashboard, but where you're interacting with it is the scope of the data set that you're feeding to it.
So the people will interact with the dashboard, not with the bot. And
yes,
so the bot is just for the setup part to get to kind of where you want that bot to pull your data from.
Where do you want him to join? Yeah. If you want the bot to join, sorry, go ahead.
Where the bot joins basically? Where is the like starting point? Zoom, Google Meet, all of them, or is there like a sequence plan, or I'm missing something?
No, we looking at it, we did some deep dives. I found it fairly easy. It can be Google Meet, Teams, Microsoft Teams, and Zoom. A number of those tools are fairly easy to integrate, so we can offer up anything. And the way that it joins the meeting is it's actually joining the meeting as a participant. It's not an admin. You're not giving it admin access to your Zoom account. There will potentially be options where you can grant it. You can integrate your Zoom account, your Google Meet account, where it would have admin API access to get further metrics. But as long as that bot is joined as a participant, it has full access to the audio transcription, the chat channels, and I want to say even like the reactions, the emojis, you know, as a participant, anything that we see, it would have access to. So we can take that in as input.
Is there any like cost problems there? Because if like I assume Zoom API isn't free, maybe it is.
No, so Zoom API is pretty much free as long as you're just making queries, even posts. But you have to have a Zoom like pro account, essentially a subscription account for Zoom to get access to that. So the end user, the customer, would have to actually be paying for their Zoom services. Then we would potentially have access to it for free. Yeah, and that's like an extra layer. Honestly, most of our features that we offer can be satisfied by just having our bot join the meeting, because it really just needs the audio. It can transcribe, extract, summarize, do all those things as a guest. It can capture the chat, the chat discussion itself, and inject that into the summary and so forth. So it's able to do a lot without that. Some of the extra.
So it is able to
metrics.
capture chat and the video stream also on the fly.
Yes, it does. It does do it live. We do plan to do some streaming where information can actually be displayed on the dashboard that's currently live in a meeting. Then there is additional functions that you started to touch on. I haven't explained yet, but that is automation. So you can have pre-configured statements, like Insight IQ, can you book a meeting for blah, 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 blah. And if you have Calendar integrated, then it can actually create that meeting for you and then send an invite to the participant that you state. You can ask for, maybe who's missing today that was attended last meeting, things like that you can ask live. That there in the beginning, I think that's going to be fairly simple and minimal as far as the automations, but we do plan to expand on what you can do during a meeting live using the bot automations.
Who is going to handle the server side? Is it something you're doing, or the client also has to figure out the infrastructure, or it's both ways?
So we host the back end. Much of our AI models might be API calls. So we're going to be using potentially Google Bard as the ChatGPT replacement, and we'd use that as an API endpoint. So our backend's just making that API call to Google. If we want to fine tune some of those models, which is I'd say at least 50% of the cases, we want to fine tune it. So we take the pre-trained models and then we host them ourselves, fine tune them, and then host them ourselves. We're still making an API call, but we're making the API call to ourselves, essentially. So we manage the back end and kind of the end to end.
Okay, so not two servers, but you just all in one place, the bots, or they actually, all the infrastructure is on your side, and do they may be more than one server for each feature?
There might be more than one server. So we have our front end server hosting the dashboard and the website. Then we have our back end server that's kind of just handling all the logic. If we're hosting, which we will, hosting our own AI models, we may not actually put that on a server. We may just make that a Lambda function in AWS or a serverless function, maybe Docker containers, something, right? And then our backend is going to make a call to that and get the response. And then the back end is what's responsible for serving, that to the front end or back to the database or whatever.
Okay. And the website, is the website and the dashboard the same thing, or are you going to have like a landing page, like two different sites? Like where would you kind of get the first initial people in, or is it going to be like a tap tool style?
Yeah, so both, it is kind of both. It's the website and the dashboard. The dashboard is like the home page. Then there's sections for more specific information. So, like a My Meetings section. I have a bit of a website started, but it's in draft form, so don't want to show it. And then in the My Meetings, it's really just a list of all your meetings, and you can navigate that way. Really, everything in our website are just views to capture a specific type of information and a way to navigate to the information that you're after. But really, it's all the same information, right? I mean, it's all just a collection of the knowledge and insights that were shared during a meeting. And say you want to look at who the participants were, then you may go to that view. You want to look at all the list of meetings, go to that view. If you want to ask a generic question, then you go to that particular bot. So website and dashboard together, I would say the home page is more or less the dashboard. Most common pieces of information that you might want to see that shows up on your homepage. And then there's other places to navigate to for additional context.
But for a first timer, if I would right now want to download the bot, assuming that exists, where do I need to go? Do I go to the website and I have like my own journey there, or there is like a business element to that where there actually need to be like a customer client operation, and that goes to like another way?
Yes. So when you become a customer, you log in and then you have your profile. Your profile can now integrate. You can integrate calendars. You can integrate Zoom accounts. You can integrate Slack, Teams, whatever your chat, your communication tools are. You can integrate all those. We want our tool to actually also take a copy of what is happening. Say you're using Slack in your team, and that's how you're conversing outside of the meetings. We want to pull that in as well into your KMS. That way it has more context for your questions, your queries. So when you first create an account, you're going to set up any integrations that you want. Primarily calendar would probably be the most common and first one, because then that's how it joins. That's how it will be able to join your meetings, is integrating into the calendar.
Okay. Is this okay? So what you're describing is actually more than just a bot. It's like a somewhat like an infrastructure. So because one thing we want to end up is like a solution statement to the problem statement. And yeah, and you gave a lot of information what that it's like much bigger than it previously I actually thought. And not easier to kind of say what the tool is, because it has many tools in it. And where would the starting place be? What are other people's thoughts here? Like Michael, do you think these kinds of, like, where do you see this like a problem statement or like a solution statement? I mean, like, what are we creating, like a bot or infrastructure or service? And is it open source? And what questions you else have to kind of hone down on this?
So I think it's really fine balance of what you consider technically feasible, of what is open source or open sourceable, and what is useful, right? So there is, I understand on Catalyst, it's great if we can contribute to open source, but if you are using Bard or ChatGPT, naturally the core of the solution, the core component, is not open source, right? So then you can work around this situation by basically providing a library that says you can replace it with Nano GPT of Karpathy that is on GitHub, even if the quality of answers may decrease, right? That's one thing you can do. The second thing is, I think the aim is to be as useful to the people that organize the meeting as possible. So maybe that should be priority before open sourcing, right? So that would be my two things. I used ChatGPT, I used others. I have technical doubts about the feasibility, but I'm not competent enough in AI to figure out how to fix that. So if you already have a prototype of the solution or a fallback plan, something like, if ChatGPT doesn't work, we can do it with Elasticsearch, right? As a backup, fully open source solution, or with Nano GPT with special prompts like find a solution to question, here is the user question, within the following text, and just copy this following text, which is the full text of the meetings, right? Would that solution work? I mean, it's computationally extensive, right? Because for each word, ChatGPT does a lot, basically a full matrix multiplication of or millions of parameters, but maybe that's feasible, right? These are the only things that I would say. From the technical point of view, of course, if you can say that, yeah, I have experience with ChatGPT and AI, and I know it will work because I tried it, or I have a demo of how it works in my example, that would be great, because this is kind of potentially attractive feature, but also difficult to implement.
Thank you, Michael. I'm taking feedback. You mentioned that there were some specific concerns for ChatGPT. I do have my own concerns, absolutely, which is one of the reasons why I'm actually going away from ChatGPT. That's not my preferred tool. Bard and there's a few other options that are more in the ballpark for what I want. But if I understood what your primary concerns were for ChatGPT, I could take those into consideration when evaluating some of the other. To specify what those concerns are with ChatGPT?
The first is ChatGPT is designed to be trained on very large data set. So retraining takes a long time and consume a lot of parameters. There are other models that are optimized to like 1% or 1 promille of the usage, because you know, from the economical point of view, you may not want like 10 or 16 Tesla cars just to run a single service here, right? Unless you really want to outsource all the queries, because the other thing is, if you are using ChatGPT without fine tuning just from a commercial solution, then of course you are dependent on its faults. You cannot fix them. So my first concern would be, it may be too big in terms of parameters and retraining effort to really meaningfully retrain it on your data. Maybe Nano GPT, for example, which is both open source and much smaller, would be a solution. There are also claims that there are ways to do it with 1 promille training time. That would also decrease the training effort, and that would be two first. So open source, whether it's open source and the training effort. And the third is backup plan on how to query it without full retraining. So like prompts that search within the following text or something. Is it technically feasible, right? Or
isn't ChatGPT open source?
No.
Nano
no.
GPT is.
Okay.
ChatGPT is not. No. Okay. Now GPT-3 is open source, but the tool ChatGPT was built on GPT-3, well, 3.5, and that is closed source.
But
so
again, this is a trade-off in a way. Yeah, I forgot to mention it. It is a trade-off, because the question is how much work you want to put in, or you expect the community will be willing to like improve it. Then you want open source if community will want to improve it and you want to improve it. If you don't want to put that much work into this AI aspect, then maybe it's perfectly fine to use commercial solution, right?
Yeah, and definitely some of the same questions that we've been, concerned with the past month or so, all for the same reasons that you're talking about. So I did play a bit with taking my own ChatGPT and training it myself with some open sourced data sets, very large data sets. And I was able to train the model fairly easily. However, the results were nowhere near. I think I was getting 72% accuracy, where there's other people who have taken their own version of ChatGPT and trained it and got it to like 96, 97% accuracy. So my 72 is poor quality, but that's probably because of the ML that I was giving it, the data sets that I was training it with, and so on and so forth. So if we were to use it, at least in the beginning, it's most likely going to be a fine-tuned a pre-trained ChatGPT, well, something like ChatGPT that's been fine-tuned for our use case. And then eventually we could build our own, train our own, and open source that. We also want to work on building a developer community around that. So if when we do open source it, we have access to a larger community that can help build with us.
So you would like to have it kind of search GPT that is kind of search engine that is open source and can be adopted to different uses.
Yes, yeah. And I am leaning towards Bard as our solution, but as it's not even public yet, nobody's really had their hands on it. So I don't know. Of course, the media is saying it's better than ChatGPT, but who knows? And ChatGPT was trained on less than 1% of the total data set that GPT was trained on. So it's significantly scaled down, which is easier to deal with, but yeah, we have lots of things to cover.
I'm trying to craft now the solution statement and to be as abstract as possible. Perhaps you could also give a few minutes everybody to ideate on that. Like everyone comes up with one sentence or two sentences to describe now what is this tool or this solution that we have described today and the way you understood it. And then we compare them and then we select which would be good and see if we can refine it to the good one and move on with the next questions of this chapter. Yeah, and I will start from the right to left. And basically, I'm going to read through what was mentioned, and then the one who wrote it gives a little like 1 to 2 minute explanations where this idea coming from. And once we have gone through all the stickies, we do some voting, what you think about it. Or if it's way too obvious, then of course we can skip that. But I always like to do some heat maps. All right. ChatGPT bot for your Zoom calls and other digital meetings. Author ChatGPT Notion SO integration. Maybe click up. So just a lot of integration options. Challenge is trying to do much with one solution, then span across 3 different platforms. So I guess an assumption that, hey, we should actually split into more proposals, or we'll see. Open source community secretary powered by AI. So yeah, an AI executive assistant for everybody. Oh, that's very neat. Nin, let us in your brain.
Yeah, I was listening to the call, and obviously first use Otter, use Notion. ChatGPT is the rave, and like Michelle said, right? Over-reliance on ChatGPT may be a little bit tricky, but undeniably it's a useful tool, valuable, has a lot of utility, and can make things easier. And then I just added some notes on the side because there's Otter, ChatGPT, Notions. They're all like full products. Zoom and Google Meet, they're all full products, right? So try to, but even when you say, hey, we can book meetings, like assistant to book meetings and so on, that's also another chatbot product, right? I don't know how the power of ChatGPT can make it simpler and executable because it can do a lot of things, but it also means that you'll have to integrate with Google Calendar and Outlook Calendar and all those things. So it's a bit tricky. So probably, maybe just focus on what's the most valuable thing, what's the biggest value add that this proposal is creating, right? And going to the core of it. Note taking is huge, and also booking flights and meetings in the hotel also huge, right? One is more commercially feasible than other, different models. People who are booking flights and hotels and need an executive assistant generally have money. People who are taking notes don't always have money, right? So you're choosing between building a community tool that has more chances of getting funded because of Catalyst, right? Versus a commercial tool that has potential to make money, right? Not that both cannot make money. So you go into the right-hand side is kind of like commercialized, and the left-hand side is open source community secretary powered by AI, or AI executive assistant for everybody. Now, if you build one, maybe the community secretary take notes, probably more executable, right? Buildable, easier to build and launch. And then once you launch that, you can build the AI executive assistant for business tier users, right? Using all the existing integrations and then add whatever else that you need for that to happen. You can mention that in the proposal to like phase 1, phase 2.
Okay. We do have a roadmap that sort of displays a bit of what you're talking about, phase 1, phase 2, and some of the features that we plan to offer in phase 1 and phase 2. And we get the same feedback that you gave. Basically, this is a very large undertaking, try to narrow it down. And I agree with that. I come to the same conclusions as you. One of the things I do struggle with that I'm having a hard time going beyond is that in my head, the value proposition that we're offering here is not necessarily the executive system or the knowledge management system or the automation AI bots. It's actually the integration of the three that becomes far more powerful than the individuals. So I'm having a hard time separating those and saying, okay, we're going to do this one first and focus on it, then this one, where in my head, the value prop is actually having them being able to interact with each other. So yeah, I'm struggling with narrowing it down, to be honest, because I feel like it extremely devalues the value prop that we're trying to bring and build. But I do agree with your assessment 100%, and I just don't know how to solve it.
I see. Integrations just take time, right? In order to have time, you need funding or time or sweat equity or sweat, blood and tears, right? I would focus on, so probably the proposal, I would personally, right? I would focus on the pain point and the value that speaks to most people and most voters. If the goal is to get funded, focus on pain point value that speaks to the most voters, and then you can always build it and then switch into commercial mode, right? To focus on those voters that have budget in order to generate revenue.
Okay. Yeah. And that is kind of our goal is approach community-based organizations and then venture into enterprise and corporations. But for those here on the call, breaking it down to the 3 pillars, knowledge management. So really just storing your data and then interacting with that data as one pillar. The other pillar being community collaboration on specific topics. And then the other one being, let's say, the automations, the trigger events and so forth during meetings, after meetings, stuff like that. What's your biggest pain point? Attending meetings like this on a weekly basis and having to retain that knowledge and memory of all the previous occurrences and apply that as context for current discussions and conversations. What is your biggest pain point? Is it the retention of that knowledge? Is it the collaboration of your community, or is it the manual labor that surrounds it? That's the automation piece, like booking, scheduling meetings, and so on and so forth. Where would you find the most relief if we only provided one of those solutions?
As somebody that spends probably 40 to 50 hours in meetings, right? You know, scheduling meetings is not hard. I use Calendly for that. And I have assistants for that, you know, executive assistants, except they're not, you know, they're efficient, but it's just tough to find time during a busy calendar. For note taking, we use Otter. The summaries they don't identify who the speaker is, so kind of like enriching who the speaker is, who said what, and the transcription is not the best, right? So I don't know what language models or NLE models they use, but all of that is great. I just have it just in case I forgot something or need to check something. But if there is something where if someone said something that's actionable, for example, hey, can we book a meeting for tomorrow? Or Curtis, could you help me with this? Or T-Roll said, hey, Nate, could you help me with that? Right? Kind of summary of action items and items to follow up on that's shared across whoever attended, right? And tag the right person. If that is a tool, I would pay for that tool, right? Because we have a lot of meetings, we talk about a lot of stuff, community talks about a lot of stuff. But let's get something done. And instead of sifting through the whole notes or watching the whole YouTube video, right? Having highlights, not just highlights, but action items. How to improve on this, because I know community wants to do a lot of things. At the same time, they don't want to go through 10 hours of recordings.
Yeah.
That's
One of
my
the
biggest.
takeaways I also kind of took previously when you shared the value, I realized that perhaps this solution requires a specific target group, and that could be like, where do we want to look? Maybe as a Cardano and as a Catalyst participant, the audience is, and the most key holders are the Cardano Foundation, IOG, and Morgan. Even though they do not seem to vote heavily, their opinion, how they realize what kind of proposals there are, will affect heavily those who vote on Catalyst. And right now, what's going on is this like how do we structure the MBO and how do we start the Voltaire? And there are now community groups and different initiatives are establishing a way to discuss these kinds of events and when do we vote, how do we vote, what should be the parameters. So, and the timing seems to be, we'll see how the timing goes, but perhaps the Catalyst F10 could be a way to propose that, hey, you all have these governance meetings and we are going to have them for years to come. This is not a one-year event, and to target these action groups. So that's just my thought.
So just to address that statement, we had that conversation last week of who our target audience is, what's the persona, all that other kind of stuff and we really are passionate about, and this kind of goes into what Nin was saying too. It's not the breadwinner, it's not the moneymaker, it's not the easy way to get to funding, but we're more passionate about community-centric customers. So DAOs, open source communities, and just, groups of people that are like-minded, whatever the case is. That's what we'd like to target, because we do see that there's like a gap there. Everybody, Otter.ai, Recall.ai, a lot of these tools that are available target the enterprise because that has the money, but that leaves things like DAOs and communities missing a good portion of it, or at least more difficult access to some of these tools. So we wanted to try to gear our tool around the community. So the members, and maybe they're all free. They don't have to pay for our tool if they don't want to. They only have free access to read and view some of this information. They probably won't be able to interact with, the ChatGPT and stuff, but they can see the reports. They can see the summaries. They can get access to the knowledge management. But then the community organizers are the ones with the licensing, the ones that are the members. And I think having the community members get access to that and see how capable this tool could be, then they would be inclined, to become members as well. So we wanted to try to be more community centric, if possible, but that is going to the most difficult path since it doesn't have the money that enterprises would have. Back to what Nin was saying.
But I think if this is brought up in a proposal, then it will also capture the attention of community to rally around and actually help you to deliver it. Because one way, you just have to kind of realize that there's a business contract with the whole ecosystem, and that the intention there is like important. However, like we also mentioned before, like to get this foot in, like what the first step. Once you get out the first showcase that, hey, this is very helpful and it uses, now there is just, it opens up a whole new world of opportunities. And then we can discuss where is the audience. And because I think also that this tool itself will create value. So then it enriches the people who use it. So if it's created for specific communities and for agendas, but you don't kind of put the barrier to it. Everybody still can use, and perhaps if too much demand, then yeah, we can talk about the subscription fees and stuff, but it's still a community can use it. It's not like, yeah, we target this, but it's just focus is there to solve their meeting issues and integrate there. But over time, this proposal just has like a specific timeline to solve that. Hopefully it executes on the time, and if it gets done or it's not even that not getting completed, then we basically can see where we are left off and where community can like pick it up and can repurpose that service that captures valuable insight to build the knowledge management system. The community can interact with the data in a more useful manner. And then finally, community members can derive value from this data to share with others. And I think it captures almost what you actually described before. Or you want to add more to something to that?
No, that one was me. I think that's why it has my my flavor.
Let's go to add two thoughts also. Like one way is to look at it is like an infrastructure which uses AI tools to automate meeting outputs. And that will be like a general gist to the problem statement. And another one was a tool that can capture audio stream to produce expert assets. So very specific thing, but then I started realizing, okay, it's like a tool that can be used to automate meeting work, a tool that can be used to automate creating assets from meeting audio. But so because I did hear a lot of like meeting stuff, so like having that summarized, and yeah, basically, although I think now when this other discussions, I think we're going beyond like a very specific feature, and these were like, I started off with the feature and tried to like get bigger and bigger. So actually we'll even put that here. So let me open up the meeting and join the Miro board if you are here, and I will create the voting option. Do the final. So what we're gonna do is we take the results, look at them, and then we keep that in mind and ponder on them.
Man,
So, well, I mean, just to provide like some samples or examples of what we plan to gather, maybe this will spark, a conversation. So metrics just being as simple as who attended, what is the attendance? That's a metric. How long were they actually in the meeting? That's a metric. So timescales. How long did somebody speak for? Like let's say it was a 90-minute meeting and somebody spoke for 60 minutes. That's a metric that can be captured and used for whatever the end user wants. Like if they want to query who is the biggest speaker out of all these meetings, it's a metric that's going to be captured. So that's just like examples of some of the metrics that we can capture. Are there any other ideas on metrics that would provide value to a community or something?
Oh,
I mean, we could potentially do like country of origin or geographic locations and capturing those metrics to see what the
long are we?
largest, what's the largest, maybe we have most of other participants are from Africa or Singapore or whatever, and that can help inform when the time should be scheduled for in the future. Or, I'm just trying to think out loud of how we can use some of these metrics. We do want to capture the chat and then somehow relate it to the conversation that's happened, the audio conversation that's happening. But we also are aware that commonly the chat takes on its own, right, its own topic and its own discussion separate from the audio. And the AI that we use, the model that we use, has to be able to make that determination between the two. And so that is going to be a challenge that we're going to be presented with.
Well, that's there has to be a way to give feedback to the bot to say that was useful, and like collecting that kind of quantitative agreement.
Mm-hmm.
So
one thing, I'm sorry, Tiva, go ahead.
But yeah, the question is, can you make it two ways? Because I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's tricky because the more power we give to the end user, the more power we're taking away from the automation. And it's a big struggle. Like the end user wants, the power, but they also want it to all be done for them. So we have to find that middle line of giving the AI the freedom to execute in some situations, or the freedom to make classifications on its own. Then we also want to give the freedom to the end user to make those determinations, but we have to sort of ride between them, unfortunately. So yeah. One thing we do plan to do is any hyperlinks that are posted in a chat, if it's relevant, which it should be relevant to the audio stream itself, we can scrape those. So capture the hyperlink, scrape it, and then summarize that entire website that was posted into the report that's produced at the end of the meeting.
So basically integrating chat to the audio stream and basically.
Yeah. It may just be hyperlinks in the beginning, and like that becomes valuable. We will store the chat itself, but having it integrated into the summary is going to be a challenge, right? Because if you're having a discussion about your favorite ice cream in the chat while the audio is talking about, I don't know, the next, agenda items, we can't merge them. We have to sort of keep them separate. And then when the end user prompts, hey, I want to know this, this, and that, it can actually query both sources, but they're stored in separate places in different data stores. Yeah, because trying to integrate them is difficult, especially if they're different conversations.
Right, I see Kaua added a new measure.
It's not a measurement, it's a tool to make a measurement. And Curtis was saying about linking chat, audio, and the participants, what they are saying. And this is a tool that's available. Unfortunately, it costs a fortune. We tried that on Swarm, and a 6 minutes video costs like $80 or something.
Wow.
So it's still a very high priced, but it does exist.
And that was to merge, you're saying, merge the chat with what's happening?
Yeah, they have several tools in there. What we were trying to do is get the transcriptions, who said what, and then throughout time, when we have like 100 footage of a certain topic, we can search the indexer to find relevant materials. So as you input research, it will finding, and you can get the output that you like. For instance, level of participation in those 100 footages, like you said, the time that the host talked in each meeting, the topics.
Yeah, so what you just described is essentially what we're building, to an extent, yeah. That's the knowledge management piece. So we have the meetings, it records, it transcribes and summarizes, classification, extraction, all the normal stuff, and then that gets stored. Then we have something like ChatGPT that uses that data set, that has access to that data set, and you can prompt for that specific, hey, show me all the conversations that happened around Catalyst governance or Catalyst circle, whatever the case is, some election, some vote, and it could produce all of the conversations that happened around that topic. So we do plan to do that. Yeah, that is kind of our design. So hopefully that, and there's ways to make it cheaper. It sounds like the expensive method you were talking about is fully API using the pre-trained models. And we are hoping to capture those pre-trained models and host them ourselves. So we're making the API calls to our own backend, which will reduce the cost, hopefully.
Thanks, Kurtz.
Thank you. No, this is great, because this is the kind of conversations that help drive the direction. Absolutely.
However, we still have the fork in the road. How do we scope it down for the end user and for the proposal? Because yes, solution is very much needed. All of them are, but which one and which strategy to go and to explain to the voter that this is the way to go.
So Tivo, on the yellow, the top right one that you were showing, which is the biggest value? I do feel like that's a critical piece of the conversation, because we got to that section because we were trying to narrow down our scope and find a single, solution. And with Nin's feedback that we have a lot of solutions here, it's a bit too much, too complex potentially. So let's select one. That's what started this conversation, was that I felt by only providing one solution, it completely devalues the platform, in the sense that you need these three pillars for all of them to be valuable, but independently, I feel like they're less valuable. But that's my own opinion, and anybody can, right, have a different opinion. So should we address the scope aspect with that piece of the conversation? Do we need to provide a single solution, or do we need to broaden the solution statement so that it captures, all of these potential solutions? How should we move forward?
I think this platform one is actually, when we look at this statement as an infrastructure which uses AI, that already infrastructure feels like, okay, there could be many solution sets. So that basically captures all the three key elements. And the most important one, which was talking about, was automation, and it also touches it. Perhaps the meeting outputs is too specific, so we could remove that. And from here, so yeah, I do agree that which the solution should and could provide a bit more abstract view into this. And then in the program detail, on writing the proposal, it's going to be a bit harder, that you need to be very concise and not spend too much time into describing all the solutions and ways. But this already gives you a good map that we have 3 of them, and maybe that's a whole other topic of how to actually narrate the text together. And yeah, that's why we have Tunis, an expert here, who later creates a story. Well, maybe this is not the session, but he perhaps can help with that. Okay. Another one is open source community secretary powered by AI. I think what is reflecting here is also this on top. We talked about community, and your statement, which was refined. It looks like everybody had their own view on which of them was the best one. But it captures a lot of like community sentiment. So that should also be included in the problem statement, which the main one is missing. Let's try to do one combination here. An additional statement which captures the sentiment of all the statements we did before.
Well, you mentioned scope before on something. Do you have to watch out for like scope creep, or I know you mentioned scope somewhere, but that's the only thing I could remember. You were talking something up in the top there, but I was just thinking about too scope creep, you know. I don't know. I just kind of noticed that's the only thing I kind of understand. Am I kind of on point with you there?
Absolutely. Yeah, that goes back to what Nin was kind of describing, that this project, this platform is fairly large and complex. So it's currently at a high risk for scope creep, meaning the features that we offer, the AI models that we build and design, that can easily get out of control. Like we could easily just do 1,000 different, features, and that'd be easy to get trapped like that. So we have to sort of narrow down what is it that we're trying to offer and build here. And it comes down to these solution statements, I think. So scope creep is a risk for us right now because we have a blank canvas. We can do a lot with this information, and what do we want to do with it? Anything we decide to do or features we decide to implement are very time consuming. Okay. So scope creep in this case is choosing to do too much. So I agree that it is a concern. Yes.
Oh, okay.
One statement: an open source community infrastructure which uses AI assistant tools to automate meeting documentation. Mouthful, but I added a bit of like a problem statement into it. The question is how is that true? Like how open source it goes, and
yeah, we want to be fully open sourced. We want to be crowdsourced, where anybody can contribute to the tools being built. Where we do struggle when talking about that concept is monetizing it. It's if it is open sourced and fully open sourced, then how can we retain customers? How do we get people to pay for this service if we're also offering it for free to anybody who's technical enough to deploy their own instance of it? So it's a challenge. We want to be as open sourced, but we also want to be sustainable.
Do we even want to use AI in our naming, or we go more abstract? So the open source community infrastructure that uses.
So the AI pieces is how the end user or the community member interacts with this data. So, you know, the KMS is a crucial piece. The knowledge management system is a crucial piece. And then how they interact with that KMS is using the AI tools. Not really sure how to describe it, but I mean, that's the gist of it.
Usually it's a service that provides tools. And now because I did touch that on before, like, do you need any kind of like a service included in a solution that onboarding and kind of getting going, or it's expected to be out of box, basically? Here's a link, figure it out yourself, and it should be straightforward. Or that's more like a B2B. Okay, here's the community, what to do, how do you set it up, and
yeah, we want it to be B2C in general. So out of box, they can just kind of use it, and it derives value for you. So it produces reports, summaries, blah, blah, all the kind of the usual stuff. And then you can, out of the box, make queries to your KMS, like what's the most common question asked during these meetings, you know, things like that. That's out of the box experience. But then you can create templates. So the templates are how you structure your reports and how the community sees some of the extracted value from these meetings. And so they can create and customize their own community experience. And then community members are able to see this stuff. They're able to see the reports and summaries and all the value that comes from that. So it is meant to be an out-of-box experience, however, have enough customizations and automations to be able to provide additional services for some of the more advanced users.
I was thinking to go even to the place to say that it's a marketplace, and you basically create the infrastructure, and that is open source. You put your own bot there, and from there it's like a marketplace, but others can also put that in there, come and like put their own integrations, because you have already set up. Yeah, the question is, because it's an open source, I assume you have guides how you do it, but it's not the main focus, I guess, at the start. So that the other question is, do we want to give like a developer experience too here, that somebody else could basically use the infrastructure to serve their own tools?
I see. Yeah, I don't see it as a marketplace per se, meaning, you know, other outside external sources can contribute their bots. We have, you know, our bot is just capturing the data. It's gathering the metrics and the audio streaming and you know, the chat channel. It's collecting that. Then we have post-processing that pushes it through a myriad of AI models to produce that specific information. It's open sourced, so people can help develop those models and maybe the flow of the data itself. They can also use our models if they want to just deploy and host their own, which incentivizes them. I think it incentivizes them to contribute back to developing the core model. So say they're using our models and they wanted to do something. They wanted to have a specific feature or provide additional information. They can actually contribute to our code source to provide that additional feature or functionality. And now our platform uses it, and they can, again, just keep using our open source AI models. So it's not really a place, at least the way I'm seeing it, is it's not a marketplace where people come and bring their own models. It's our models, our workflow, but it's open source to where people can use it and they can contribute to it to enhance it.
Is the integrations open source?
integrate, we're just leveraging existing integrations. So you can connect your Google Calendar, you can connect Slack, maybe ClickUp.
And the infrastructure itself, it's also open source. So the way that you connect all of these tools is visible to everybody. Or not?
Yes, but it's also, we're leveraging open, like in that case, we're actually leveraging open source. This is open source information and we're just enabling it in our infrastructure. So we're not writing the code for that type of integration. This is just common open source practices, I guess, and we're using it. So yeah, I would say our implementation of it would be open sourced, maybe, that if that's a security risk or it violates SOC or any of the global compliancy policies. If it violates that, then probably not, right? There's going to be some stuff that cannot be open sourced due to security concerns. But that stuff is generally already open sourced and it's just our integration. That's really all it is us implementing that technology that's not ours in that case. The stuff that would potentially be ours is the AI models, the training process, the ML process, how we train them, that kind of stuff.
Okay. As a sustainable open source community infrastructure that provides an AI tool to automate meeting documentation and on-time analysis.
Yeah, I'm trying to see how can the focus be on, because what you're addressing, a sustainable open source community infrastructure that provides AI tool to automate meeting documentation. So that piece of it is the retrieval stage, or sorry, the collection stage of the data. So we're collecting the data and processing it and then placing it in some database. And that statement, I feel like infrastructure that provides AI tooling to automate meeting documentation is the collection piece. But then there's the retrieval of that information, which you kind of say, so, and on-time analysis is a bit of the retrieval. Like how does the end user see this information? How is it presented to them? How can they make queries against this information, and where does the value come from? So I think that's the other piece of it. You have the collection, storing the data, and then retrieving the data, but that's where the value comes from, is from how you retrieve it, how this data is represented in your dashboard, and how you share it and disseminate it to your community members. That's the other piece of the solution that I'm just not sure how to. So yeah, retrieval and then maybe dissemination or sharing. You know, it's collecting and storing. But then the dashboard's meant to be viewing that represented data and deriving the value from it. So instead of, like, here's how I try to use as the analogy, Otter.ai records your meeting, transcribes it, and then summarizes it. And it gives you a summary. That's one piece of value that it can create for you, because it's more time efficient, since you can just read a summary. But there's a lot more that's missing, a lot of value that you can still extract from that same bit of information, that same bit of data, and that we're trying to get access to it. Sharing hot topics with your communities, like this is the top 3 or top 5 conversations that are happening within this, and that shows in a dashboard view, so any of your community members can see that, and your community members themselves can inquire your database, almost anything, and then share that value that they created with the rest of the community as well. So I think that all kind of hits on the retrieval piece of it. Okay.
But what I did is I changed the time analysis, which is a specific retrieval, to just simply saying that it's a retrieval, and like it automates meeting documentation and retrieval. Although it may question retrieval of how, like as a meeting, but then I think that is the question again, which is like, come read a proposal, and you will have like a bullet points of what kind of information you can retrieve. And I think this is a good thing to actually mention.
Okay.
The collecting, storing, and retrieval. Like everything what comes with a pair of three sounds always like a good thing. So when we go down like a detailed plan, perhaps this could be like clarified all the time. And some examples down that. So we have like a format of bullet points. And people can gloss over, okay, retrieval, okay, I get it now. And then they can jump to the next place. Do we want to work more on the problem statement or now taste it out?
I was wondering that meeting documentation, does that include, like from a project management perspective, does that include like meeting minutes and stuff like that? Or, I mean, that's just what's going through my mind in case somebody's got like a project management mind frame, if they're going to ask that question, or that's the only thing that I was going through my head other than you guys are talking about, but I don't know that I'm not quite sure.
That does fall under some of the metrics. Yeah. So it's going to capture timestamps, you know, who said what, when, and how long were they speaking for, what was discussed when they were speaking.
Oh, you were talking about it earlier. I didn't get that.
Yeah. So essentially what you just said is the collection. It's collecting some of the metrics and meeting minutes through that. And that is, I guess, your quote unquote documentation. I do agree. The word documentation is a bit confusing in this use case. And we are trying to, like, that's why we kept going with insight. However, the word insight is overutilized, but that's what we're capturing is insights, not specifically documentation, but documentation can explain that too, in a way. It's talking about meeting minutes, metrics, participants, attendance, and all of that is being captured.
Okay.
How about this? A sustainable and open source community infrastructure that provides an AI tool to automate meeting documentation and retrieve insights.
Like that, yeah, because it's more specific. To me, insights is retrieving insights is the value derivative of the documentation that you're collecting. Yeah.
Okay, then let's put that on a test. And hello, Ken. We are progressing further with our problem statement. So our problem statement is disseminating and documenting meetings are time-consuming activities. Let's make sure it's a statement that it is, and we can remove this one. And our answer is a sustainable open source community infrastructure that provides an AI tool to automate meeting documentation and retrieve insights. Does this solution answer the selected problem? Ken, what you think?
At face value, yeah, because we're having to operate in an abstract manner because there's so much involved in it, and we're abstracting a lot of the detail out of it. So yeah, I would say, in my opinion, it is addressing it directly. However, it's not providing any details, but we will later. So yeah.
Does anybody feel like it doesn't address the selected problem statement?
Well, Curtis, AI is quite a complex thing, and I know that you've got far more experience in that field than I have. There are, I think that it's documented here as well, there are free apps that can record a transcript of calls and that kind of stuff. Where do you see this problem finding that solution? Do you see the AI solution as the way to go?
So yes, the AI's purpose in this framework is to surface the valuable insight when it's the right time, so knowledge management systems, documentation, conversation history, Discord, right? I think many of us can agree that it just gets to be very large and it's very difficult to access that information and the value from that information. So AI's responsibility in this case is to extract the value when it's appropriate, when it's relative, that type of stuff. And then assist in disseminating that information and presenting it in a quick and accessible manner instead of just long form.
How do we keep it simple for the end user?
Yes, we do plan to make it simple for the end user. Yeah.
But how do we do that?
Oh, so the dashboard, I guess you could call it, is going to have some out of the box templates that will provide specific information, but then the account owner can also create their own templates. So say, you wanted to know agenda items or action items or even decision items, then AI would extract that from that particular conversation, maybe even over a month's time worth of meetings. It can extract, here's the agenda items we've been addressing, the decisions that we've been trying to decide on, and extract that specific value from it and then present it to the community itself.
Could we retroactively write a machine learning model or algorithm that also went back through every recorded Project Catalyst video documentation historically and drew up key points around the thread of narratives and ideas that have developed and evolved through our ecosystem?
So 100%. Yes, that is the intention. It may require some more advanced users because really you just have to upload. You take all of those downloaded recordings that I have previously recorded prior to you becoming a customer, and then upload all those. And this is one of the key reasons why we need the KMS. We need the knowledge management system. It's just this massive database. So if you import all of those pre-recorded meetings, they now become part of the KMS. Then the AI is how you interact with that data. You can ask it these questions. You can have a template that pre-serves that information to the viewer. So yes, absolutely. That is the intention. Upload as much as everything as you can. And now you have full access to derive your own value, from those insights. Is there specific use cases that you're looking at? Because the intent right now is just upload.
Yeah, my primary concern is the feasibility of building this. Tools, resources, manpower, all that kind of stuff. So that's something that'll have to be considered for this in a high level structure. I mean, the nuts and bolts of it are already there, so it's not going to be a challenge. And there's Catalyst and all that stuff. And then there's obviously getting the community support to get it built, and to prove that it has that value, which I'm sure would be a walk in the park, considering the vast resources at your disposal, Mr. Snapbrilliant. So, yeah, no, I can see this becoming something quite valuable for the community.
I do agree with. Sorry, go ahead, Tivo.
You touched on the good point. I like the feasibility of that, and that is where the good segue is, like how realistic is the solution. And few of these open questions is just simply describing your impact, and are we able to do that? Does it make economic sense? We touched on costs before, and perhaps we could brainstorm more of them. And are there any legal implications, which I also touched that there could be, which reduces the chance that everything is open source, something have to be basically, yeah, all of these topics again.
Well, we can work backwards. For the legal implications, everything is already waved away before you join a Zoom meeting and everything's on an open ledger. So, the presumption is that you're not protecting the GDPR or the Data Protection Act or anything like that with blockchain data, because the presumption is you already know it's public information. But that's, my back of the envelope law school dropout opinion. For economic sense, where you'd need to find a way to monetize the tool, or you'd need to make the argument that the monetary value of the tool is so great for Cardano that it should be subsidized by Project Catalyst. I'm less inclined to the latter, more so to the former. An impact, I think the impact's self-evident. I mean, if you had an AI tool that could go back and do sentiment analysis on every single conversation that was had through the history of Catalyst, then yeah, it'd blow people's minds. We'd be able to see the birth of new ideas. We'd be able to see the evolution of the chain, how our governance came to be the way that it is today. So impact that's a non-issue, but the economic sense, the economic model is the main thing to address if we want to get this built.
Definitely some of our main hurdles right now is the economic sense, like you said. And I will add a little bit to the legal implications. We are still concerned with GDPR and SOC. Reason being is, yes, they've accepted by user agreement that this information is public and therefore shouldn't contain GDPR and SOC. But some of our users we're allowing them to restrict access to the KMS, to the knowledge that is captured. And if it contains GDPR or SOC information, which we now need to use AI to classify that information as GDPR violation or SOC violation.
Curtis, I'm going to stop you
Yes.
there. I'm a bit of a radical. I think
Okay.
decentralized organizations don't fall under the scope of regulation, but that's just me. Other people have vastly differing opinions on that.
So I do agree. Now I'm just thinking out loud here of a particular use case and help me with this, provide me feedback. Swarm, IOG, all of them have their meetings that are not public information and that they're not even released to the public. We don't have access to anything that's ever said in those meetings. However, if you could summarize those private meetings and then divulge the summaries or extract certain information from those and share that with the public community, do you think they would do that? And if so, do you think they are concerned with GDPR and SOC at that point?
You're talking about Chatham House rules.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. I'm talking about what?
Chatham House rules, or you're talking about how can you it's almost like a zero knowledge proof thing if you think about it on a existential level. Like, how can you prove that this was the conduct of a meeting that we don't have access to? This is what was said, but without revealing who said it, but we can prove that it was definitely said. That, I think, is a more wide-reaching problem, and I think the problem we should seek to address first is the community accessible information, compiling that into a form that is more accessible, essentially, to everyone, making it simplified. And also, that modeling of the history of our chain, the history of our systems and what we've built is kind of helping people follow the narrative in a simple way. I mean, what would stop us from taking the transcripts of every Catalyst town hall and every breakout room, feeding it into a ChatGPT version 3.5 or whatever, and then just asking it questions? What would stop us from doing that?
Yeah, nothing. I mean, that is essentially what we're hoping to build with the tool. So yeah, absolutely.
I think this kind of clarified the fact that target group should be more decentralized, even though you first also discussed like the tool for like B2C, like directly to client. However, that may actually complicate things if you take it individually, and more easier would be to come to the bigger groups who are already open and transparent, and then we have less of these legal implications.
You'd have to give it out for free. Any problem? How do you monetize it from that point?
Yeah.
But no, I get your point. But that's where we get back to the middle issue. How does it make economic sense?
Yep. And the way I heard your feedback, Big Shrimpin, was that as long as we have a proper user agreement and they agree to the fact that don't include any GDPR, like you're alleviating our responsibility by just agreeing to the user agreement. All this information is public information if you choose it to be.
I'm saying as a decentralized identity, I have no interest in legislation
Okay.
at all. Now, that might not be the case for the people building this tool in particular, but to have to go back and waddle through and say, well, did this person agree to be featured in a ChatGPT? Well, ChatGPT, look at the example. Did ChatGPT get permission from every single website that it scraped? No. If it's publicly accessible data, I think we're in the clear. Now, when it comes to the content of private meetings, that is another case entirely. And if we can find a way to, because for example, the stake pool operators in the IOG Discord server operate whenever they have a meeting under Chatham House rules, which essentially you can talk about what was said in the meeting, but you can't attribute who said it. Right now, for us to take that data as a transcript and record it, and then protect it under those community decided rules, yeah, that as long as we have we all engaged in this process under the shared understanding that this was the rule set, we wouldn't then want the tool that we build to elucidate that to everyone else. I use that word wrong all the time. We wouldn't want that to reveal that to everyone else and say, oh, well, Becky from IOG said so and so about stake pools, when in reality the agreement was that, well, she may have said so and so about stake pools, but what we're saying is that was discussed in general, rather than what we're saying is that specific person did that specific thing. But then again, with AI, problem with AI, as we've seen, there are always ways to get around that kind of thing. Have any of you guys seen the Dan jailbreak on ChatGPT? Well, it's to say just abhorrent things that it believes are true because it was tricked into breaking its own user terms of agreement, breaking its own guidelines. So that's another risk that you have to deal with when working with AI. It will be brutally honest unless you have someone holding the reins. And I think brutally honest AI is a good thing, but other people disagree. And I'm very aware that other people disagree.
I had a question, a more specific question, how to make it, does it make economic sense? And does anybody in the room have any idea how much it actually would cost to get insights from a meeting file? Like the computational cost, or is it simply the time cost of people uploading it?
Are you referring to without this tool as a solution? So like right now, what would it cost?
With tool. So if you have the tool and you is every query, does it cost, and does it to do a summary, and if somebody wants another summary, does it double cost, and how many summaries we expect somebody queries about one video, and if it's 500, then
let's say money was no issue for a second. Let's say we could do a one and done deal and say Project Catalyst, SnapBrilliant needs $1 million, a million ADA, in order to pull this tool off. And it has enough intrinsic value that we want to create it in an open source way that the corporation wouldn't be expected to generate into a viable business model, because what they were building on the merit of the contribution it makes alone doesn't need to generate revenue itself. It could be, in theory, paid for by the taxes that we pay on our transaction. It could be paid for by Project Catalyst. If we go under that assumption, and we know they have a good track record of pulling this kind of thing off, and we say $1 million is, a pretty fair sum for something so incredible as this. And if it met all of the criteria and it was part of community guidance, feedback, all that kind of stuff, and it wasn't shit, then we could look at just fund it through Catalyst as a one and done deal, and then after the fact, not presume that it needs to generate revenue later. Not the kind of business model I'd follow, because I don't believe in that kind of stuff. But if it had sufficient value, it's certainly an option.
I think that would be a good starter and get us to potentially MVP, MMP, but there is a downside.
No, we did it for $1 million. Would you expect the full product?
Well, yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes,
that should get us to launch. Absolutely. But the speed at which the AI industry is moving, it would only be relevant for 6 months, quite potentially, right? And then you would need to additionally maintain the features, improve on that.
That's why it would be made open source, so that community developers could you would pass on the torch, and the community developers would pick up the slack from there.
Okay.
The way that I think of it, as far as the documentation system, if the AI can interface with the system as like a user, like you might have an API for an AI to interface with the system, but having something where people could work without an AI, or they could work with a different AI if they want to. That's sort of something that I've thought about before.
Yeah, and for that kind of sum, you would expect it to be incredibly well documented. I mean, beginner friendly, well documented, so that anyone could add. You would put in a framework and a tool set to say, okay, we're building the base layer for this, we're building the L1 for this. When you make further contributions to this code base, when you add new things in, this is how you do it. Here's how the code works. Here's where it's hosted currently. We're looking at decentralized hosting solutions, but you'd have to do that yourself. Here's how we would think you would do that. Every step of the way would have to be planned out so that it could be handed over to the community as something as a gift to Cardano to justify the vast cost of, say, for example, $1 million ADA to get it done. And that's all presuming that the team at Snap really are capable of doing that. And from my experience,
So what? I mean, I'm just curious. How come you keep bringing up Snap Brillia? I'm just where's the relation?
Well, you could go for DC Spark, or you could go for who are the other guys? Gimbal Labs as well. Like anyone could put in this proposal.
He's basically community developers who have the capacity to build something like that, and he's bringing that as an example.
I see. Some of that's discussed, and Ken, this probably goes back to you. Some of the different AI models, we are investigating how we can leverage SingularityNet's AI marketplace and DSLs. They are actually developing an AI DSL such that you can make a prompt, and then an AI model itself will determine which AI model to use best for that prompt. So it's actually AI just determining which AI model to use, and we're exploring that.
Yeah, what I had more in mind is giving the users decisions as to what they like. There, you may want to, like, if you're taking the full knowledge base of everything that's been done in Catalyst and everything anyone's talked about, all Charles's videos and whatever, you know, that's like moving that into some structure that is easy to work with and iterate off of, like in your own personal knowledge base, because like how it relates to a distributed system and how it relates to all the individuals involved. Like people have their own projects and they may want to contribute to the knowledge base, and they may want to pull from different things and have different ways of dealing with different kind of information. And so like that, there's, I think, like an AI is meant to, like, it's trained to do something that people can do. That's sort of the point.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can think of the AI as a user on the system, and maybe different people can, like, if it's decentralized in some way, and different people can connect their own AI implementations to the system, then it won't fall behind, because people will be able to experiment on the AI front, as well as being able to manage their knowledge base however they want to, whether they want to do it with or without AI help.
Yeah, right now we're talking about essentially building Chat ADA. You can have that one for free. That's a good brand. And from my understanding, and I might be mistaken, my information might be out of date, but if you want the highest value for money when it comes to buying developers on Cardano, I've been led to believe that Snap really is the place to go, and that places like LocksInc and places like DC Spark and whoever Gimbal Labs overcharge significantly for developers and aren't very accessible. But again, my information might be out of date. So it's certainly something that I'd like to see some development company within the ecosystem build. But I appreciate that it's a significant technical challenge and it's not something to be taken lightly.
No, I definitely agree that, I appreciate that input.
Yeah. If I can chime in on this Nebula side, sorry, I just joined in a little bit late. But I heard Tom, you mentioned Nebula a couple times, right? I'm pretty sure that when it comes to helping find developers or AI researchers, we're more than capable of delivering. But for this specific use case, Curtis, when it comes to AI, it's not much of the engineer and the knowledge. It's more of the availability of data and the computing power that you will need to create a better model than what ChatGPT or whatever they have. It can be done well if you have the right infrastructure. You need really experienced people for that. They're not cheap.
No, that's why you need to put in for about $1 million ADA.
The whole thing is definitely not cheap. Like we tried to build AI generated coding screening and tests, which we kind of, and Frank, he's pretty good at what he does. And at the end, like we just were hitting funding limits because in order to build a tool like that, we needed much more than 1 million data. Like the AI machine learning high performance service, they literally can burn through a couple $100,000 very quickly.
Oh, right. Well, NodeShark could do it for $1 million. So if SnapRelay are saying they can't do it for $1 million, then we can quite easily do it with a US government. I mean, our chief technical officer works for the US government and does this kind of technical analysis all the time. So if SnapRelay can do it for $1 million ADA, I'd vote for it. But if they can't do it for $1 million ADA, and they need much, 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 much more, because I think $1 million ADA is a fair fucking take on the grand perspective for it, then I'm sure there'll be other competitors, even if it's not NodeShark, like DC Spark, like Gimbal Labs, that would also be interested in building this kind of tool. I think that's a fair price. And if you don't think that's a fair price, I think you're living in La La Land.
I mean, I can relate to what Nin is saying, and what he's describing though is the training. The training of the data, it goes through serious computation. If we don't have to train our models and just fine tune them, so we use pre-trained models, this goes kind of back to our previous conversation, is it depends on the implementation. If we're fine tuning a pre-trained model, it's far cheaper than trying to train the model. I'm going to go more towards the previous. So yeah, that's how I can relate to what you're saying, Nin, and what you're saying, Tom, because you're right. If we're utilizing publicly accessible tools out there, that should greatly reduce our costs and it should be achievable. But there's both of you guys are accurate, to be honest.
Quick question. How would you go about fine-tuning a model that's proprietary, right? GPT-3 is not open source.
It's not, but you can get pre-trained models and then just fine tune them with your own data sets. So they've been trained by, say, Google. I don't need to know the process or the open source of how they trained it. I just need to take their trained model and then I'm training it again, basically with our own data sets. And so I'm fine tuning its responses, and I'm either using, there's 3 different ways I can use to provide it feedback on how accurate it's training the model. So there are ways, definitely. And of course, the most expensive option, being doing our own training, is the most accurate as far as the results that it produces. However, it may not even be feasible because that is very expensive to do. And we're not just talking one model here. We're talking like 10 at least at this level.
Yeah. Yeah, you may want to do a little bit research on how to or explain to the community what it means to adjust a pre-trained model and what results.
I mean, I can do that. We have a video.
Like
we do, yeah. So we do have a little YouTube.
It's going to be negotiable
Explainer. Yeah. the numbers dictate the process is what I'm finding. So how we design our architecture is going to be based on how much money do we have access to, because the more money we have, the more accurate and refined we can make this tool. But if we're limited on our funding, then we're just going to have to build what we can. I mean, that's just the nature of it. So yeah. And then I did want to quickly address, Ken, you talked about the different AI models. We are somewhat addressing that in the community aspect of it. So community members can get access to that community's KMS and then make their own queries. And it could be something nobody thought about, and it pulls reports or it pulls in the results. And it's very, very valuable information. They can then share that with the community if they choose to. But it doesn't directly address, hey, I want to use a different AI model. Our intention is to be more, our models are capable of anything, you know, like ChatGPT. It's almost capable of deriving any value that you want and then producing it for you. Then the community is now creating and deriving that value from the KMS and then can share it out without the need of hot swapping the AI models or using a different model. But there is still that need is still there. It's just we're trying to lessen the requirement for that type of a thing. But I love that feedback. I hadn't really thought about it in such a way.
Does anybody has any closing thoughts or comments they would want to add before I stop recording and sharing?
Yeah, I'm genuinely excited for this because I pay for Otter as well as Notions, both for KMS and the note taking. I think if it ever goes commercial, I'll totally sign up as a beta user. And obviously, Curtis, you're an awesome guy. And you have any of my support as well. Excited for this to become a proposal one day. I know we've been talking about this since 9. It's 12, so 3 hours. So.
Well, you have just so you know, Nin, there is a proposal out on Deep Fund for this, so you're welcome to go and vote for that on the 27th.
Oh, awesome! Cool, great. And Thibault, thanks for organizing this as always. Good to see everybody.
Actually, this ties into quite nicely with what Ken mentioned, that this infrastructure could also be a marketplace for others to tinker and add AIs, which we also in the morning discussed. However, SingularityNet is quite well positioned, and I think Curtis also chose the strategy quite nicely to not create your own AIs and marketplaces, but leverage existing marketplaces, what are happening, and AI tools others are providing, and then reconfiguring and seeing if there is a way to collaborate together to build a solution, which here is to get insight from the meetings and on both live and offline.
Yeah, that fits in with what I meant. Like, so if you're using an API that fits with whatever SingularityNet is doing, so that it's the same process for syncing with it. Like if you're providing, if you have a knowledge system that has all the data, you're providing data that can be used for other things as well. That I'm not sure on all the details about how SingularityNet works. I haven't looked into that too deeply.
They are that marketplace similar to the way you described it. You know, there are a bunch of AI models, community created models, and then you can access them via API to build your own solution. In this case, we are building a solution that may leverage those APIs, right? Or we may determine that we need to refine and train our own models, which then we would do and host on that marketplace, SingularityNet's marketplace. So essentially what you were describing leans more towards what SingularityNet is building. And then they're also building the DSL aspect of it, which is brand new to AI industry as a whole. Yeah. So we're more of the creating a service based off of those AI models. But there's room. I feel like with your interpretation and your perspective, there is room where the end user may want to change the output or the results based on the AI model that's used. And that's possible. Maybe we offer options, but
Well, I mean, I think
yeah.
one of the things you need to be careful of is the thing we've seen with ChatGPT, in that AI models can be incredibly biased. So if this doesn't happen, and this is a big if, then it needs to be a collective community approach with multiple different stakeholders and multiple different parties with oversight, and probably not run by a centralized organization in the first place, lest it cause unsurmountable, unimaginable damage to the recollection of the ecosystem and and how we got to where we are today. So let's always keep that in the back of our minds.
Oh man, that's tricky. So you're talking about consensus on which AI models are used, which I understand. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, that's similar to my thought process about being able, like, there's the knowledge that already exists, and then there's the knowledge that someone is working on. So, maybe I want to use a knowledge management system to put together all the ideas that I'm working on. Maybe I don't care too much about using artificial intelligence in that process, but having it set up in such a way so that the the way that a user who doesn't care to interact with AI has a similar process for doing that knowledge management as the AI system itself, so that you have the ability to cross pollinate, or to have the ability to or just the having a unified process where people agree, okay, this is a good process for laying out knowledge, and it's a good way for, and then that can be put into the system as a whole. People might want to search for things that someone's doing, like maybe they're not using AI in their knowledge management, but maybe AI, they make it permissible for AI to search their knowledge base and use that in the output for what someone else is doing.
Yeah, okay. I'm starting to get a better understanding of what you're envisioning. So I don't necessarily see this tool replacing knowledge management. Knowledge management is a very large concept and complex. It sounds like what you're describing is the different methodologies. So there's like Zettelkasten, there's Get Things Done. These are all different methodologies that you can use to structure your knowledge management. But in our case, we're actually kind of doing the opposite in the sense that we're flattening the knowledge base. It's not a hierarchy structure. It's pretty much one flat database, and then you're extracting.
Well, it is, when you extract it, though, you're
Yes.
getting a structure out of what you're
Yes.
with the flat base, and so somehow the AI has to be giving you some sort of structure back that works
Yes.
with what you're trying to do.
So let's
Yeah.
look at how ChatGPT works, and it's that it's a pre-trained model that uses human intervention to decide the kind of answers that it gives, right? Now, the problem that you have there is that we don't want to write a AI model that is 95% accurate, but also says that, in the hypothetical example where DC Spark built it, that says DC Spark's farts smell like roses, right? We don't want to create that bias in the model because that would do a disservice to the community, right? So as it's built out, not only will there have to be significant community contribution towards how this is built, but I don't think it's even proper for a single source or a single studio to build it, especially if Snap Rally are saying they can't do it for $1 million. I don't think it's proper for a single organization to put this together, and multiple stakeholders within the Cardano ecosystem that design the framework or foundation, which will ultimately become like Ask ADA, like Chat ADA, where you can just say, hey, what was the history of this idea? Well, Curtis Myers came up with it on the 22nd of February, 2023. Well, if we build that tool, we need to make sure it's fair and impartial to everyone, because if not, we will accidentally create a tyrannical system that fucks up lots more than just Catalyst, lots more than just Cardano.
Well, if you go back to the idea of like having the AI seen as a user on the system, then you can trace back where the information came from. If it came from the AI, then you can use your own judgment as to how reliable that information is based on what you know from other sources or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's a good way to take too much information and give you something smaller to work with that you can go and look into whether or not it's accurate afterwards.
Yeah, but you have to be careful how you train the model. I don't think a model that uses reinforcement learning in terms of human engaged reinforcement learning is a safe way of building it, because of the inherent biases. Like, for example, if I were the one training it, I would make it say that Node Shark is amazing and does nothing but brilliant things, right? If SnapBrilliant were training it, they would say SnapBrilliant is brilliant and does nothing but amazing things. All their ideas are great, right? So it would need to be trained by the community, and we need to have an incentive structure built into that to get various opinions and beliefs. If this is all presuming we use that model of language processing, like there are many other models out there, and I think perhaps it might behoove us to look at different ones than the one that that reinforcement learning model. But that being said, it's also about what we can get on budget. It's also about what we can get within the price range of this hypothetical $1 million ADA figure, and what organizations would make what contributions towards that.
Yeah, so just to address that, the ML ops workflow design that I'm building right now does incorporate the reinforcement training so that we can do things like that. However, I think it's almost an impossible ask to get to that level. Your example of okay, Snap really is the best ever and nobody's ever competitive. It only has access to the data set that it has, right? So if all that it's being told is that and nobody's contradicting that opinion, then it's always going to give that result. Now, if you're reinforcing it and saying, okay, well, this information is less accurate or not accurate or whatever, that's going to feed back into the system, but it's expensive to using a reinforcement model. It's expensive to keep it running. That's meant to be during training. You're reinforcing it during training. And then once it's done, it's kind of done. You might have a thumbs up, thumbs down. That's easy to reinforce, saying it's just less accurate, but you're not providing it true reinforcement. True reinforcement is here's where you were wrong, or here's where you could have, done better, whatever the case is. To me, that's the same with human nature. If I grew up in west side of the US, then my social norms and social constructs are going to be formed around that. You put me in a different area, that's foreign to me. That's the same as AI. If you give it data set, it only knows what is given to it. So it's to me not necessarily an AI issue when you have perspectives like that. I don't know. That's such a tricky topic.
Well, there's the way that we perceive anything, even as people, is based on how we can discern patterns, and the patterns may not be complete, and the patterns may be offset from reality in some way. All the time they are, pretty much. I don't think there's anything that we could do that isn't biased in some way. Like everything's biased when it comes to understanding or trying to match patterns to reality.
Yeah, and I think one of the solutions to this is its full structure and documentation would need to be provided open source to the community, so that if, for example, DC Spark or Gimbal Labs created this, then any implied and inherent biases that were built into the system could be, if someone had the tenacity to build a competing model based on the same source code and train it their own way, could give contrary opinions and could give a different interpretation of the events that had transpired. Ultimately, I think the main focus should be, can we do this? Can we build it? Right? Is there an organization within Cardano that has the capacity, the tools and the resources, the manpower and the intelligence to put this kind of thing together? And if the answer is yes, then it's something we should wholeheartedly support. If the answer is maybe, but it's going to cost us 4 million, then I think it's something we should put on the back burner for now until the open source community for general AI models can make available. I think a million ADA is a completely fair asking point, especially as we're going back into a bull market, which could be like $4, $5, $6, $10 million in the short term, and obviously short term by Cardano standards, right? And in the long term, it could be much, much, much more if someone was smart enough to take that million ADA, put it into a stake pool, and just hold on to it and use the rewards to slowly build this out over time. But in any case, it's definitely a tool that I think would massively help people understand the very complex narratives that occur within our ecosystem. And I think it'd be a tool that certainly, I don't think anyone within their right mind wouldn't back at least a first principles, an early alpha, a minimum viable product being produced by some company within the ecosystem.
Thank you. We did get quite deep from these last comments. Does anybody who has not spoken yet, Tõnis, Daniel, Kauwe, Robert, want to have final thoughts on today's discussion?
Well, I like last what you just typed about open source. I kind of miss it. You said it has to be open source. Why?
Has to be open source so that the competition bodies could give different interpretation of the data.
Yeah. So let me make it really simple, Robert. Right? If Vitalik Buterin wrote this software and he wrote it to analyze all of Cardano's history, and he decided to, during the training process, put biases in that made Cardano look like a very silly blockchain that wasn't going to succeed, then what would happen is the AI model for like the entire history of Cardano, like, chat ADA, would have inherent biases against our own blockchain ethics and community. So if we don't make it open source, then there's no way of having a competing tool, especially if it's being funded by Catalyst, by the way. There's no way of having a competing tool set come along and say, hey, maybe this is inaccurate. And if we build our foundation on unsound principles, to start with, like, there are ways and means to prevent that getting funded, that funding going through if it doesn't fulfill that criteria, like on chain. But if we have a tool within our ecosystem that can do the amazing things that Curtis has suggested that could be built for documentation, then I think that it should definitely be one that seeks absolute truth as the highest virtue, as the chief technical officer of IOG told me was the highest virtue of Cardano and blockchain while I was at Scottfest. If it has not absolute truth as its virtue, if it has this project making money, all this kind of bullshit as its absolute virtue, then it could do some serious harm to the ecosystem, as any AI model could. So AI is great, but like, let's be careful with how we do this.
Okay.
In the chat, Kauwe mentions that he likes the discussion. He's happy that everybody is contributing to this. I will then close our session now.